Thanks, Valentina. Okay, so I guess Shahryar is going to share his own screen. So in the meantime, I'm going to give a very brief introduction. And Shahryar is the Chief Product and Sustainability Officer at Spinnova. He defines himself as a sustainability enthusiast and professional in the fashion industry. He has a technical and professional experience, more than 2 decades, and he worked almost all stages of the textile apparel value chain. He leveraged his chemical engineering background to optimize processes for the environmental sustainability. He has voluntary advisory roles with international organizations, and he remains well-versed in the global concerns surrounding environmental pollution and social compliance within the fashion industry. So he is going to deliver his presentation titled "The Role of Innovation for the Transition Towards a Circular Bio-Based Economy." So I leave the floor to you, but just a quick update. So we have 5 to 7 minutes for each presentation. It would be very nice if you can stick to the time schedule. Thank you.
Let's see. Great, because I just wanted to confirm that my screen is visible because I'm using 2 screens.
Yeah.
I hope it's visible. And if I change also, it's visible, right?
Yes, it's working perfect.
Great. Good morning, everyone. The time is short, so I will try to cover quite a few things. I think I would bring here a little bit industry approach, what we see, the impact of the regulations, and I believe that we'll have a lot of insight from Lars later. Wanted to highlight some of the things, very important things that I'm pretty sure almost all of you know those very much and well aware of these things, that what is happening in the textile industry. First of all, we need a lot of production. There are several reasons. We are not going to talk about that, but we need a lot of production because of this demand in the market. But at the same time, we know that fashion industry is quite big. It has a big share in the whole, if we consider all the industries. And it has, of course, significant impact on many aspects. Of course, carbon footprint and water footprint is one thing, but in many other LCA indicators, if we say. And we are hopefully it will be improved, those kind of things, through the innovations, but not much has been progressed so far, as we see that only 1% of the post-consumer textiles are today recycled, and I don't know, it might be even not in a very formal way. There are definitely a concern in the industry, and that's why I wanted to highlight that there are different kinds of global brands are committed in different kinds of commitments through different association or different kind of initiatives. And one of these are few of those I try to mention, that we have a quite big target. We have quite target that it's very difficult to reach. Like by 2050, I think we see that many of the brands have been committed already to go carbon neutral. So that's been seen as a big challenge, and there are many other coalitions that has been promising for something. And we can also see that there are a lot of EU regulations, and that's actually where we are here. And most of these are, for example, trying to reduce the environmental impacts throughout the life cycle. That's the most important thing. Of course, social things are there. I'm not highlighting right at the moment those things. If we only consider that and that environmental aspects, we really want to go towards the circular economy. That's the main aim. But what we have been facing right now in the industry, that I wanted to highlight, that these policies, I mean, EU Green Deal, EU textile related regulations, almost all of these things you are very aware of. But what we see from the industry, that I think there are still lagging a lot of scalable or scaled innovation technologies to, I think, address those kind of challenges that we are trying to solve through this kind of regulation. Regulation is one thing, but from the implementation side, they are, I think, is still big laggings. One of the very important thing is that we really know that the industry, textile industry, fashion industry, is most of the things are not happening in Europe. That's, I think, I would put it as a big challenge that is happening somewhere else than Europe. So, and we know in most of the cases, scope 3, I mean, the happenings in the supply chain has the most significant impacts on the environmental side, scope 3, and that's actually where the investment are needed. Decarbonization, or if we want to do any kind of improvement that's needed on the supply chain, and that means that it should, most of the things likely should happen outside of EU. So that's one of the thing. And then we do not have a viable circular economy model. For example, if we use in Europe all the clothes as consumer, we probably would like to keep the waste here. We would like to use, if we have the ideal technologies available, we would like to produce the fiber here. But I think the market is somewhere else. So I think this a viable circular economy structure is very much needed. And then policies are quite much, I think, biased to some of the areas, but we really see that a level playing field is needed in order to promote the bio-based innovations or bio-based raw material sustainable alternative. So here I think I would like to bring Spinnova as an example, that how it can help in bringing this kind of innovation, can help solving or implementing the targets that we have through the EU policies. So Spinnova is a technology that can utilize sustainable raw material, meaning that almost any kind of feedstock it can use. It's of course, it can use wood pulp, it can use agricultural waste-based pulp, it can use even textile waste-based pulp. Anything in the pulp form can be converted to Spinnova fiber. It has a completely mechanical process, not any chemical process, so it's very, very environmentally friendly. So we call it a zero waste production, because from our factory at the moment, the first factory we have, we do not have any wastewater or air emission going out from the factory. And then the product itself is a true natural alternative. We can see that there is a lot of demand in the market. And of course, at the end of the life cycle, it is a product that is biodegradable and recyclable. I have only 1 minute left, but this is how the process looks like. On the left-hand side, you see that the pulp is coming. We do the whole mechanical things, and then we go to the staple, mainly the filament fiber, and then to staple fiber production. And then it can be used in the textile and other non-woven application. It has quite significant reduction in the footprint compared to cotton. Conventional cotton, it has 74% less CO2 footprint and a 98% less water consumption, and all other LCA indicators looks really, really very good. And of course, recyclable and biodegradable. That's why I think it's giving a true natural fiber alternative. It is a noble fiber. It will be some fiber that people can consider it as in the industry, it can consider as a mainstream fiber, not any niche fiber. So really the challenges related to natural fiber that we have at the moment in the textile industry, with this innovation, we can actually take care of. These are some of the example product that we have produced and put into the market. And this specific example, I want to show that this gray blue part is produced out of actually tannery waste. So the leather waste, we convert it to protein fiber. So using the same technology. So that's also says the versatility of the technology. I would like to talk more, but I think I have quite limited time. But thank you very much for listening, and I will be happy to have any question.
Thank you for sticking the time, and it looks very impressive. And we will open the floor for discussions, questions later on. So if anyone is interested, there will be the chance to further go into deeper in this new product. So now I would like to leave the floor to Lars, and we will be sharing the screen. But in the meantime, I just want to give a very quick introduction. Lars is the circular economy, consumption and production expert at the European Environment Agency. He is an expert on circular economy and textiles, and he is the author of numerous EEA reports on textiles and of scientific articles on sustainability, well-being economy, and circular economy. He is an economist by education and member of the Club of Rome. So Lars, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you so much, Gosa. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks everybody for joining this morning. So I'll follow up on our previous speaker and talk about the circularity of EU textiles value chains in numbers. And in the next slide, you will see my 3 brief points. The first will be, I will just tell you about the changing EU policy context. Things are changing very rapidly these days. I'll show you the difference between synthetic and bio-based textiles. And then third, I will talk about a few graphs about soon to be published new numbers by the European Environment Agency. And in the next slide, you will see the main basis, of course, is the EU strategy on circular and sustainable textiles, which came out exactly 3 years ago. And it had a vision that all textile products placed on the EU market should be durable, repairable, recyclable, etc. It also had a vision that fast fashion should be out of fashion, that it should be profitable to reuse and repair services, that producers should take responsibility for the products along the value chain, and that the circular should be the main norm rather than throw away clothing. So a very ambitious strategy with a lot of policy proposals. And the next slide, you can basically see the status that I made of where we stand on EU policies on textiles. So after the EU textile strategy, we had the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation adopted. This is what puts requirements for all products put on the EU market, and textiles is a priority here. So this is related to quality, repairing, etc. Then we have the waste shipment regulation as well. This is the regulation that limits the export of used textiles more than previously. And we have the Waste Framework Directive, which is the framework that mandates countries to do extended producer responsibility, etc. And then very recently, in January and February, we had the EU Competitiveness Compass, with a lot of focus on innovation and decarbonization. Here, the textiles industry can play a role. We have the Omnibus package. This is the package that simplifies the reporting. This has huge impacts on industry, of course. We have the Clean Industrial Deal, which talks about aims for circularity and decarbonization, especially in the heavy industry. And then lastly, but very important for everybody here, I think, is that we've started from the EU side to work on an updated EU bioeconomy strategy, which is expected later this year. And we are involved in that. I think it's way too early to say what will come out of it, but work is being done on it. And that leads me to my second point. And this is about the bio-based versus synthetic fibers. We've published 2 reports on this in the past years, one on plastics and textiles, and one on bio-based fibers. This figure just shows the overview that this is quite complex. When you have textile fibers, you have natural fibers on the one side and man-made fibers on the other side. And when you talk about natural fibers, you know, we have some which are animal-based and some which are plant-based. So the animal-based are, of course, wool, cashmere, etc. Plant-based is hemp, flax, etc. And then on the man-made fibers, of course, we have the very known acrylic, polyester, but we also have cellulosic, bio-PET, and so it's quite a complex picture, I would say. And in the next slide, we've just made this overview of how much of textiles is actually synthetic. So for clothing, it's 60%, and for household textiles, it's 70%, so a lot. And this graph here is a global figure dating back to 1965 to now, which shows that basically all the increase in textiles production has been on the synthetic fibers. So this is very much outweighing the bio-based fibers these days. And in the next slide, I wanted to show a comparison of the different bio-based fibers. And what we can see here is we've tried to use a traffic light signal showing that, for example, for climate change, those that has the biggest impacts of the bio-based fibers is viscose cotton. For water, land use, eutrophication, and toxicity, it's cotton and hemp. And those that have the least impacts, for example, for climate change is flax. For water use, it's lyocell. For hemp, it's land use. So it's quite a complicated picture. All fibers have impacts. They're just very different. And that leads me to my final point within this very short time frame. So this is numbers that we will publish in exactly a month from now with a big package. This shows the development in EU consumption of clothing, footwear, and household textiles. And what you can see from this graph is the developments from 2010 to 2022. And most noticeable, from 2020 to 22, our consumption increased from 15 kilograms per person per year to 19 kilograms per person per year. And this is actually what can fit in a very large suitcase per person per year. So it's quite a lot. And out of that, 8 kilograms is clothing, 4 kilograms is footwear, and 7 kilograms is household textiles on average. And that leads me to my final slide, which is actually what we've done. We've looked at the consumption, and we've looked at the impacts from the whole value chain. We've looked at the greenhouse gas emissions, material use, water use, and land use. And what I've chosen to show here is just the greenhouse gas emissions. And what you can see here is at the top that those consumption areas that have the highest emissions are housing, food, and mobility. Not surprising, everybody knows that. But right after that comes restaurants and hotels, recreation and culture, and highlighted here in purple, clothing, footwear, and household textiles. So it's the sixth biggest, but almost the fourth biggest, with 350 kilograms CO2 equivalents per year. Out of that, as our previous speaker said, by far the most happens outside the EU, of course. So that was my introduction, and I look very much forward to questions and the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lars. And I think we have time for a couple of questions. And in case you have more questions and insights, please feel free to write them on the chat. And during the interactive session, we will pick them up and start the discussion. But for the time being, I think we can take 1-2 questions, if any. But I must say these presentations set the baseline for us to move forward very well. And thank you again for the presentations. I don't see any hands raised or the questions in the chat, so I will leave the floor to my colleague. There is a question, just 1 second. Now too. The increase in footwear consumption is visible. What could be the reasons for that?
The increase in footwear, I think it's one of the big changes we've seen is that we have seen a big change in online sales versus sales from physical shops. And shoes is a category that is also shopped very much online, so that could be one of the reasons. Another reason I think is that we do so much more sports, so there's a combination of normal footwear and sports footwear. That's my guess, but we haven't looked into it in detail.
Thank you. Now there are a bit of questions, so I will just let them drop all the questions here, but maybe just a second one that I can pick up. The data for carbon dioxide equivalence for clothing apparel is limited to production or includes the entire life cycle assessment? I think it's a good question.
Yes, I can answer that very quickly. This is from the whole value chain related to the consumption, so production, transportation, waste, the whole thing.
Yes, thank you. So again, please feel free to insert all your questions, comments, recommendations. But in the meantime, I will leave the floor to Harry to share the presentation of the policy options that we identified. Harry, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. So I hope you can see my slides and hear me.
We can.
Perfect. So let's start what Gulsha already said. This workshop is very much about the question, what are strengths and weaknesses of different policies for boosting the transition in the textile sector. And the idea here is to inform policymakers what to expect if certain policies that you will see today are implemented. And we are also going to have in the next step a prioritization survey where you can also choose your preferred option, but this will be the next step only. And today it's about the strengths and weaknesses. So first, the method, where did we look for policies? We screened Scientific articles and reports, 130 for this project. We also screened economic articles for sustainable resource use, and we included stakeholder input from previous workshops in the project. And we were looking for existing policies to see what is the landscape, what's already there, to get an understanding of policy gaps, and of course, then to see what policy proposals could close these gaps. So how did we select the policies? This is a screenshot of circularity policies in the EU. You don't have to be able to read it, but the message here is that there are already very a high quantity of policies for the transition, for circularity and for bioeconomy, and it's really difficult to really select what are like the key steps forward. Where can we find priorities for the next steps for the transition? So we had to come up with the kind of structure to not get lost in the complexity of these policies. And this is what I want to present you now before we going to talk about the actual policies. So how did we select policies to move forward? The first step was that we looked and sorted the policy ideas for boosting the transition according to its type. And there are several types of policies, but key types are direct regulation, which is, for example, if you use quotas, maybe for use of bio-based feedstocks, for example, or you ban something, or you have thresholds for emissions, for example. And a very different policy approach would be to use more market-based instruments, which are basically subsidies, taxes, or emissions trading. And in real politics, these instruments, direct regulation and market-based instruments, are often combined or mixed. But here we tried, for the sake of clarity and for the sake of really looking at the strengths and weaknesses of different approaches, we really try to separate them for the discussion. A second decision when choosing a structure for policies is that we looked at different functions of policy instruments. The first obvious function that policies have to fulfill is, of course, to promote the transition. So to promote things like recycling or reuse, or promote the use of bio-based fibers. But a second function that's also important is to limit overall resource use. And I would like to explain this a bit in more detail. Maybe I guess you're aware of many of the EU policies around the transition, for example, the Circular Economy Action Plan, and this states very clearly that we also have to decouple any growth in the economy from resource use. And it also says that we have to keep our consumption within planetary boundaries, which also implies to reduce the EU's consumption footprint. Now we could say, well, recycling and use of biomass is exactly the very point that fulfills this reduction of consumption. But this is probably not enough. So why not? So why should we limit resource use? We have studies that show that even if you increase recycling to a very high rate, almost to 100%, it does not necessarily limit the total consumption of resources. It can be that in parallel to recycling, you also increase the use of virgin or fossil resources, for example. And this has been labeled a circular economy rebound. And one example for this is if you open up recycling markets, then consumers are able to put products that after end of life would have otherwise gone to waste. They can now put it to the recycling markets and sell them. So they have higher income. And with this higher income, they can purchase additional products. And without any additional policies, there is no guarantee that these additionally purchased products are recycled products. They can be products made of fossil or virgin material. we have a similar issue with biomass use. Using more biomass is, of course, key of the transition to the circular bioeconomy. But at the same time, it will also be necessary to limit the total biomass use, because with our current level of consumption, it is just not possible to substitute all fossil-based fibers, for example, with biomass. We have an increasing amount of studies that show that if we use biomass in certain sectors, of course, we do have some savings of greenhouse gas emissions if we replace fossil fibers, for example, in the textile sector. But at the same time, if you increase for this purpose extraction of biomass from the land use sector, you can end up in the end with even more emissions. So you have to have additional policies here that avoid this. So on top of having policies that promote recycling and promote the use of bio-based fibers, for example, we also have to have policies that limit or reduce total consumption, and that limit or like shift the biomass from places where it doesn't produce so much high value to places and sectors where it does produce high value. And the third choice we did was to select policies according to different objectives. So we're talking about the transition to a circular and a bio-based economy. And both things are often connected, but not always. So to have a very clear vision and perspective, we used a second policy set. So we use one policy set that is much about circularity. I'm sorry, the toxicity point is not for the textile sector, but it's about circularity, recycling, reuse, and so on. And the other policy is focusing, the policy set is focusing on using biomass and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So this is basically the structure that we used when looking for and selecting policies for the transition. And before looking at these policies, I want to add some kind of disclaimers, what we also considered in selecting the policies. So first, when you see the policies, keep in mind, these are not yet any kind of recommendations from the projects, but we are talking about options here. And the idea is to provide policymakers with the kind of toolkit where they can choose from policies that might be helpful. The second thing is that we very much focus on, let's call it hard and binding policies like quotas, subsidies, taxes, and so on, and not so much on overarching soft policies like strategies or voluntary measures. So we naturally have a selection of policies here, which also means that in addition to the policies you are going to see, of course, additional measures like information and education will be necessary. Also, the policies are still at a rather coarse level, so many details will still need to be specified in the future. And for now, many of these are still kind of archetypes where, yeah, the details have to be defined in subsequent steps. And finally, as already mentioned, we did not just select standalone instruments that you can just pile up on each other, but we have these policy sets with the structure I just presented. So it means there are different policies that are connected to each other because they are complementary and fulfill these different functions. Okay, so what are the policy options? First, of course, we have to know what are actually the challenges. Some of the challenges we already heard, so I make it quick. We know that textile consumption in the EU is really high, and it's expected to rise even higher in 2030 to over 100 million tons. We have a decreasing or trend of decreasing quality and duration of use of textiles, which goes under the label of fast fashion. We also have already seen that we have this increasing trend of using fossil-based fibers and also of mixing fibers, which makes recycling difficult. And we already heard today that we have these high environmental impacts on the climate, but also on other environmental media like water or air from the sector. And still we have, even though we have a vision where we want to come with the sector, we still have today rather low rates of reuse, repair, and especially of fiber-to-fiber recycling. So what could be steps to move forward? First, we have this, or we can look at policies that are about the circularity dimension of the transition. And we start with the direct regulation. So one idea we encountered is that, of course, like in the energy sector, we could use a quota, and this has also been mentioned already today. So the quota could be for use of recycled or bio-based material in textile production. And as imports are very important in the textile sector, these quotas should possibly also be applied to imports. What we already have today and what could be extended are eco-design criteria for production. We already also heard this today, which means that producers have to oblige to certain standards that improve the chances for repairing textiles, for recycling the textiles, and to have also a higher durability of textiles. So this could be instruments that promote and push the transition, and at the same time to limit the total resource use, the total consumption. What we found, we already have, or it will be implemented from 2026, a ban on destruction of unsold goods, which includes textiles. So this is a part of the implementing the polluter pays principle in the EU to discourage overproduction. So hopefully a function or an effect will be that retailers and producers alike are like encouraged or incentivized to look for options to not result in overproduction, because if they cannot just destroy the goods, they have to do something that implies costs, and they want to avoid the cost and have to think about how can we make our production more sustainable. So this could be one option to think about it in the direct regulation sense. If we look at the right side for how could you tackle this alternatively with using market-based instruments, a key push that could push the transition would be innovation subsidies. The key idea here is to support, to have financial support for innovations in textile reuse or also recycling practices. So it's not only about technologies and companies in the production, but maybe also about supporting repair services, for example. And this is not only limited to research and development and maybe pilot plants, but also about bringing these innovative products to the markets and to support the market penetration. Another idea that comes up quite often and also in our stakeholder discussions is this green VAT idea. So to reduce the value-added tax in the countries of the EU for reused or recycled textiles. The limited resource use function could probably be a carbon tax in the market-based setting. So, we have emissions trading to reduce fossil resource use in the EU, but this mainly focuses on energy use. And even though the waste sector is possibly going to be included in the emission trading system, this will probably not work for the textile sector. So it might make sense to levy an additional tax, a carbon tax, on the use of fossil feedstocks in the textile production. So these have been all measures for the circularity dimension. You don't have to memorize it. You will just see it in when we move to the Mario board. And the second policy set was about using or encouraging the use of biomass in the textile sector. So a direct regulation again could be to work with the quota here, and this time the quota is not focusing on the recycled feedstocks only, but on the using bio-based in the production and imports. And again, this could be supported by a second instrument that usually is mentioned is public procurement, because governments are also or issue a high demand in certain sectors for textiles. So this could also support innovative bio-based or in general bio-based textiles. To limit the resource use, sustainability criteria could be used that we already see today in the energy sector. And an idea could be here to have an directive that includes criteria for material uses, like in the textile sector, and possibly also in other sectors that have a material use of biomass. So to make sure, yes, we want to use more biomass in the textile sector, but it shouldn't be any biomass, but we want to make sure that only sustainable biomass obviously is used in the textile sector. So this kind of material directive could ensure this. So again, for how could you do this in a market-based policy setting? Again, this could be some kind of innovation subsidy, this time for technologies or practices that are focused on bio-based textiles, maybe even 100% bio-based textiles, so that you avoid these different recycling with these mixed textiles that are mixed from synthetic and bio-based fibers. So this could be still discussed in the details. And yeah, again, this could be for technologies. The support could be for practices and also for pushing these innovative products to the markets. And finally, for limiting resource use, which is again, especially to avoid an unsustainable use of biomass in the textile sector, there we have the idea what's already talked about in France, to have a kind of fast fashion tax, which basically focuses on the environmental impacts, what we already heard today, of textile production. And this environmental tax could like internalize these costs from increasing waste and increased pollution from textile production. And this would not only apply to synthetic fast fashion, but as the function is also to limit the biomass use. It's also to apply to non-sustainable cotton fast fashion products. Okay, that's basically it for the first overview. And now we are turning to the Miro board. And the question again is to see what could these instruments work in your opinion? And if so, what could be strengths and weaknesses of these different policy options?
So thank you, Harry, for the presentation. So I see that in the chat there are some comments and questions. Maybe we just share with you the Miro board link. We will show you very briefly what we are asking to you. And in the meantime, while people start working, we can answer to those comments and questions. So Luis, if you can share your screen with the Miro board. In the meantime, I will leave here in the chat the link for our participants to enter into the Miro board. So please, if you can, with your PC, enter in the link. I'm still waiting for Luis to share.
Vale, we are back. We had a problem with the
Okay.
internet. So yes, now we are attaching the. So I think Luis, you are back, no? No.
So maybe in the meantime, I can share my screen, and then when Luis is back, we can switch.
Yes.
So sorry for these connection problems. Okay, here we are. So in the Miro basically you will find, I see that already some people are in. So the link again is in the chat. You will find basically what was presented by Harry in the presentation. So here on the left, you have the circularity fact sheets with all the instruments and options that he already presented to you. While here on the right, you will have the biomass fact sheet again with all the instruments presented in the presentation. Very quickly, I am sure that most of you are already familiar with Miroboard. So how does it work? You can zoom in and zoom out either using the wheel of your mouse. Otherwise, you can use this bottom right tool here for zooming in and zooming out. And what we are asking you to do is to really indicate, in your opinion, what are the weaknesses and strengths of the different instruments presented by Harry. To do so, you can simply click on the post-it, move it near the instruments you want to comment into, and then double click on it and write your suggestion. And that's it. So this is the exercise. You have orange post-its for the weaknesses, green post-its for the strengths, and you will see that there also this recommendation. If you want to recommend, for example, to use a specific policy instruments coupled with other in respect to the ones suggested by Harry, or if you had any other specific recommendation on any specific instrument. So I will start a timer of around 20 minutes for this first part, and then we will open another section, but this is for later on. Harry, I don't know if you want to add something here or to answer some comments and questions that are in the chat.
Yes, sure. So before answering the questions, one more information. So first for the structure on the left side, you see this all the policies for the circularity, and on the right side are all the policies for using biomass. And in the center between these two fact sheets, you find a kind of policy criteria. So that could give you and kind of inspiration for what to think about when you're looking or thinking about strengths and weaknesses. So I just quickly go through it. So a key question, of course, when choosing policies is the question, is it really effective? Does it really boost the transition, or would it just have a minor effect? So the question of effectiveness. The second thing is administration. So some policies are really troublesome and difficult and complex to implement and mean a lot of like paperwork for the companies, for the textile producers. So this is also something that would be interesting if you have any knowledge or ideas about how difficult it is to implement these policies. A third criteria could be the cost. So different policies impose different costs, for example, on the companies or on the policymakers. If you think about public budgets, if you use a subsidy, for example, this policy will be more expensive for the government than if you use a quota, for example. Which is also very interesting for us to know is if you know of any legal barriers for some instruments that you find here. So if you find something that you would say, oh, it's actually interesting, but it's not, it would not be allowed in my country, for example, then it would also be interesting to hear about this. And finally, acceptance. Different policies are, or some policies might lead to high resistance from stakeholders or the public, consumer, whatever. So if you have the feeling some instruments would have low acceptance or high acceptance, it would also be interesting. And final comment, if you have any, so these are just ideas for criteria to look for strengths and weaknesses. And if you have any other criteria or ideas, of course, you can include this as well.
So thank you very much, Harry, for this overview. I see that there is already many activity ongoing on the Miro board, so thank you very much. I forgot to tell you, if you have difficulties with the Miro, please just let us know. You can raise your hand for commenting specific things, or you can write in the chat and we will be sure to insert your specific contribution in the Miro board. So I don't know, Harry, if in the meantime, you just want to take some of the comments from the chat.
Yes, I can maybe read some, Valentina.
Of course.
Yeah, there's this comment coming back several times, and it's about the consumption mentality. So there is a need to shift in the end user consumption mentality. How do we do that? There was a mention also that we need to do more education. So it's really on the consumption side. Who wants to respond to that? Harry, maybe.
Yes, I can say something. So I totally agree to this. So the policies you see are, as I mentioned, not complete. This is a focus on really like these hard policies, and we will need education and information instruments for exactly what this comment is about, to change this mentality of just take and throw away after some uses. So this will be definitely also policies that we require here, but for the sake of keeping these what you're just doing now, the commenting, manageable, and then not to flood you with dozens of policies, we just sideline this for now. But maybe also one last thing about this. You saw that in the policy fact sheets, we have this limit resource use function. And some policies are also there to act and affect exactly this. For example, in a market-based setting, the environmental tax and the carbon tax, this could lead to an increase in prices of unsustainable textiles. And this would also contribute to reducing overall consumption. So this could be an instrument that could be also like tailored to this function. So the more you want to decrease the total consumption, the higher you could choose the tax rate, for example. But I totally agree that educational measures and so on have to complement this.
Yeah. Maybe Lars or Shadiade also have a response to this point. Lars, are you there, and do you want to respond to this specific consumer side challenge?
Just on the consumer side challenge, I think it's important to be aware that, you know, there's often a lot of policies who put the responsibility on the consumer, who wants to. This is what we've seen for decades, putting information to the consumers and let the consumers decide. But this has really failed many times. So I think it's important to see that what we're looking for is a system change, where we change the whole system with policies doing their bit, with companies taking their responsibility to produce more sustainable, and then consumers acting to that, because basically consumers, they face so much marketing all the time that they are in this bubble, and it's really difficult for them. So I see they have part of the responsibility, but not the lead.
Okay, well, Stefan Weidner, he said that concerning the regulation eco-design, the regulation idea is mandatory durability. For me, is not viable. Many textiles are not disposed at the end of its technical lifetime. Measuring and reporting would be a nightmare of bureaucracy. Industrial use, loan textiles, uniforms, etc. are already optimized today. It pays off simply due to commercial reasons. So reduction of garment consumption for me is a social task, not a technical, which can be regulated. Maybe, Stefan, you want to also explain a bit more about how you come to this conclusion?
I've seen these ideas of how to measure the technical lifetime of textiles. Textile is hardly to be defined in lifetime. There's so many components of the textile which influence lifetime. If you look at your clothes you're wearing, how to measure this? There are means in the labs, but it's extremely difficult to do this testing. Costly event and whatever. And once you put the same piece of fabric at a different place at your garment, it's used differently. And as all of us don't want to use uniforms in wearing, but some fashionable products, you're just killing everything. And also observe when people are disposing their clothes. The big challenge for us is the disposal of clothes before technical lifetime. Just after 1-2 times wearing and falling apart, and the tension of seeds, how a product is combined, how a product is assembled as a garment, is very difficult, to do in standards.
If I could just come in here, I
Yeah.
think this is of course part of the picture, but part of the picture also is that we see very rapidly increasing amounts of textiles of very, very low quality on some of these online platforms. And I think a lot of these design requirements is also to avoid that, because of course it is very difficult to measure, but some things very clearly can only last 2 or 3 times and then have to be thrown out.
But Lars, the challenge I see, I've been in material sciences in steel as well, in the very depth. And there is a lot of standardization, which is not possible in this textile, which is so variable, so flexible in the combination of things. So we are very soon going to a nightmare. Our parents have been used to doing their own textile homework. They have been had a feeling about quality and observed this. And exchanges this general know-how by done standards coming from the green desks will kill us.
But I think hopefully we will see a good process in the work of the eco design, which will realize what can be done and what can be not be done. I
The
think
regulations
that's
I've been
the
looking
hope,
into
because we
there,
shouldn't do anything that cannot be done.
I'm really anxious. I know textile labs I've been working in. I've been the textile parts of the textile industry which doing these basic jobs which are influencing mostly this durability, and it's a nightmare. Those tests are done at samples to understand where the optimum, but it's impossible to make a product proof by it. It can't be paid.
Okay.
Maybe one more comment on this. This is also something we try to consider in the fact sheets, because we encounter exactly this problem also in the other sectors that we deal with in the project. And we also already notice in the energy sector, all the certification of the feedstocks. It's really, as you say, it's a nightmare. But this is currently the key policy idea where everything is headed. So the question is, do we have policy options that do not need this certification, this LCA? And this was the idea of making these market-based policy proposals or idea, because this could be policies where you do not have to make these life cycle assessments, but you have a rough estimation on environmental impacts. This could even be standard values. And then you just choose a tax rate where you see it has an effect on total consumption. So this could be a pathway.
We have to be very careful. I'm now out of professional lifetime meanwhile, but what I'm observing, the management ideas today are very much towards those key indicators, these key performance indicators, figures. But figures, believing that figures can replace know-how. And in textile, being a doctorated, scientifically educated person, in textile, there are big limits on this, as long as we don't want to have uniforms as to wear.
Yeah, well, I think this is really very good discussion. I also want to move to some other questions. There's this question, well, it relates to this discussion, but Harry, maybe you can elaborate a bit more on the question, how do you see the feasibility of implementing such policy measures in the context of the omnibus? regulation and the general push for simplification.
Yes, so I'm no expert on this specific regulation, but this connects a bit to the discussion we just had. The transition is and will be very difficult, and there will be no solution that does not have any kind of complexity. But this is, of course, a key criteria to select the policies according to, are they difficult or are they a nightmare? And this is also, for me personally, one of the key questions. Can we design policies that avoid this complexity, avoid this screening and analysis of each single product, and to burden the producers with endless amounts of reporting duties? So this actually, I'm giving back this question. So if you have knowledge and information on this complexity and this administrative burdens that are associated with certain policies that you find in the fact sheets, it would be really good for us to know or to hear your thoughts about this.
Meanwhile, we see that there are many questions in the Miro board. So maybe if you want you experts to pick something.
Yes, maybe I can. There's this in relation to the quota in the promote transition. There is a barrier that says if there are not sufficient offering of required material, this could become a real problem. So it also needs to, well, you can put quota, but if the market doesn't develop towards the products that you're aiming at, it doesn't work. Who made this comment? Maybe you could explain a bit more why you have this expectation. No, I don't. Everybody's working very hard on writing up the barriers and comments. There's another comment, and that is that the quota system would also require a proof that the feedstock are compliant with the criteria of the quota. So I think that relates also to the discussion we just had with Stefan and Lars. So yes, and it is also challenging in relation to this omnibus regulation. But a positive remark about this is that quota are also seen as an opportunity for implementing traceability as an added value solution that support certification. I mean, so it would also help producers to create a business model, so obtain an added value to their product. And if this goes together with market instruments that were presented by Harry, there's some force for consumers to also consume the products of more added value because they're produced more sustainable. Yeah, I have the feeling that Stefan doesn't believe in this, but are there people that think this can work?
I made this comments. I'm representing Reverse Resources, and yeah, actually, I think that having quotas could be positive because, of course, that will increase the value and the valorization of the recycled feedstocks, and this could be a motivation for the whole system, for example, to improve the sorting techniques and the infrastructure available to have more textile to textile recycling. And I think that this is one of the main, let's say, motivations to have more textile to textile recycling, because we see that it's not happening that much. And maybe focusing on that note, that it was not from me, but it's like there is no sufficient offering of required materials. If there's definitely a demand because these feedstocks have a higher value, I think that would make the system to organize and to make sure that the feedstock is available, because I see a problem on the sorting right now.
Mm-hmm. Someone else has another view on this?
Carola, I fully agree. Yeah.
I have. I'm following a little bit of Stefan's point here, and I'm old enough that I have lived the time when China, for example, had the production quotas. And I can tell you, if you are setting up quotas, there's always someone who finds the way going around the quotas, or then there will be a quota market to buy quotas from someone else, and it will be causing more problems than benefits. So I'm really, to be honest, I'm really against of that idea, because it's so much from last century. So I would not go for that. But what I see, thanks for living in France, I live really near to that first experiments of EPR, and what are the benefits for the markets. And this is something that I say that we need to implement as soon as possible in every single European country, in all the products, online, physical stores, wherever people are buying products, they need to be under the EPR, and that financial support is going to make the wheels to roll, and that's really the only possibility how you can make it. Other thing is what I've been trying to write there as well. EU needs to decide for the unique communication, because as a multi-European person, I'm following the input from diverse countries, and every country is distributing this information differently. So you need to make a position there that, okay, this is the package of information of all the requirements from EU for each country, and the countries need to distribute it with their languages, with the languages of the supply chain, to the brands or to the companies bringing products to the market. Because I see another chaos coming at that moment when the eco-design directive and the DPP is going to be in place. Everyone is informing their supply chains, now we need this and this and that. And if you are thinking the supply chain manager reading through 20 to 30 diverse kind of advices of basically of the same thing, but they are all different, because at the moment the system is working like this, that EU gives a regulation, then you have plenty of consultants like myself as well, who could go to tell their truth for the brand, how to communicate it. And everyone is going to make their own interpretation of it. So we need some common guidelines, not like, that everyone is doing a little bit something somewhere and there is no common picture. So I think that's more important than putting some quotas. We need to get the information unique, because now it's too chaotic for everyone. So
Yeah.
that's for me.
Well, thank you very much. I think this is a very helpful comment, the uniformity over EU.
Maybe I can ask some direct
Yeah.
questions to that.
Yeah.
Thanks also for the comment about the EPR. I have a question, because in the literature, this was also mentioned as an important tool, but it said that it's easy to, well, not circumvent the EPR, but what the EPR does or lead to is just to collecting textiles and then exporting it to somewhere where we don't know what happens with it, but probably not recycling or reuse. So what do you think about this objection to EPR?
I don't know why it would lead for export. We had everyone is doing it today, so it wouldn't be the EPR who is leading on that one. That is the fact today. Everyone, whoever does it, in some point, the material is trying to land to an export. What you can do is indeed what was discussed earlier, that you are limiting the export of the recyclable material. On the other hand, what I wrote also on the Miro, there is a huge problem with that, as most of the recycling industry also, they need huge quantities. And of course, each of the players, they try to find the best place for their factories. And some of the countries, they don't accept all of the imports of the waste streams. So you need to be very careful of thinking what you can limit, because if you are limiting in Europe, it's maybe a disadvantage, because they not also export those ones which are already sorted. So for me, the EPR is not the one who is would be causing the export, because we are there already now. But the EPR, with that you are collecting some small money per each product that you are selling, you would be getting some financing tools for the countries to finance on innovation, on industrialization of the processes, and get people really working on it. Because, like I said, I'm placed in France, and I see how it works here, and it motivates extremely much the market, because you can get people really working on that one. And I need to say from own experience that outside France, players in circular textiles are very interested about that one. So we should get it everywhere placed as soon as possible, and then we can expect something really to start happening. Because now it's so slow, we have innovations for recycling nearly everything, but nothing happens, because everyone is just waiting, either EPR or some investments coming. So we need to get it running, and then we will get there, and we will get to the right circular and bio-based materials at that moment when the volumes are enough good, because it's real economies of scales. The prices are high till the quantities are getting enough big to compete with the virgin prices.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Barry. And in the meantime, I just want to open for the last 10 minutes also the other board. So if you go on the bottom of these two, you will see this other policy options box. So if you see here some other policy options that we consider for our work that was explained by Harry before during the literature review. That were not in the end selected to be presented today. But if you have any other policy options you see fitting for this work that you would like to suggest, please feel free to add them here. Or if you have other weaknesses and strengths for the upper part, continue filling that. So we just want to collect also your perspective on other policy options that can be considered to complementing our work. But we will keep also the upper part open if you want to continue working there. Sorry, Baron, for the interruption.
No problem. Yeah. Yes, I see several comments made about the green VAT on the reuse of recycled textiles. It says here that it is an important measure for behavioral change. While others say that the prices of garments should be affordable for everyone. So would this work together, this green VAT on recycled clothes and also bio-based clothes? or are there other views on this measure?
I don't know, but there were still some raised hands before. I think was it on the EPR maybe?
Yeah, good.
I had a comment on
Yes.
that, and a bit supporting what Mario said about the risk of having quotas or bans. And actually, I think that any of these methods, if it's not supported with traceability, it can be really inefficient, meaning that if we ban destruction on sold goods in the EU, then maybe these goods can be still exported in other markets, and the problem does not disappear. We just shift it from Europe to other places. And also regarding the quotas, I also feel that if we don't have the proof or the traceability to really see where this feedstock comes from, then there can be a lot of margin for corruption and like kind of cheating on the system. So that's why I think the information is crucial, and having these traceability systems that work and also that communicate between different legislations. So to have just one point entry of information, it's super supportive.
Thank you. There's one more hand, Lars Mortensen.
Thanks so much. I just want to come with a final comment, which I think is that these suggestions are very, very useful, and it's really timely and good to think about them. They have to, of course, be considered in the context of what is already in place, because none of these work in isolation. EPR doesn't work in isolation. ESPR doesn't work in isolation. None will work. So what is in the table now is basically, with the ESPR, the eco-design, the EPR, the product passport, but also the waste shipment regulation, which is to limit the exports. So all these are to work together, and we have to see how it works. And as that comes along, how some of these suggestions can come in and supplement as a package. So that's how I see it. It's a bit too early to say exactly how all of these things together will work. We don't know. We hope it will work well, but we're not sure yet.
Yes, that's also a good comment. And this was a bit actually the idea here, to have these two columns. So the instruments you find in each column should be seen as a package that go together, and on top of the instruments that we already have implemented in the European Union or certain countries. But I totally agree that it's not really just about picking single instruments that will do the trick, but we need several items here, but still it's also the challenge. It's not possible to just make a list, or useful to make a list of 50 policies. And that's why we try to focus it down here to 4 or 5 to these sets. But yeah, I totally agree to this comment.
Regarding the innovation subsidy for developing bio-based textiles, there is a barrier mentioned, and it says resistance from fossil industry and existing major fashion players. So I guess someone, or it's up. Louise, you have to go up a bit for to the green part. Yeah, there's this one, resistance from fossil industry and existing major players. So could the person that put this remark, this barrier, explain a bit further, because this is clearly something that is holding up what behind this this comment. Somebody explain? Maybe it has to do with the dominance on the market of these players. That someone else wants to respond to this. Sorry. No?
It wasn't my comment, but I would also very much agree with it. Yeah, I think it's very much yeah, as we see the energy transition happen and fossil fuel industry is kind of moving away from energy and transport and kind of looking for other sectors, I think there's kind of more acknowledgement that plastics and textiles are going to be very key industries for fossil fuel industry. And therefore, I think the comment's very right that the kind of lobbying and kind of market power of those players will serve as a major barrier to more progressive legislation. I think it's yeah.
Okay, yeah. Lars, how do you see this? Because with you have the good overview on this. Can this be changed with the package of measures that we can expect and that also Harry proposed?
It's a very good question. I see huge potentials for support for some of the most promising things. On the other hand, we have seen recently that the fossil fuel industry is very active and increasingly active, especially at the global scale, but also really in the EU. So it's difficult to say where this will end, but I think it's great to keep pushing and putting the proposals forward, and then it becomes political decisions from our policymakers how far we can go. But it's really important that people like us in the room here today, experts and researchers, can come with the proposals and put them forward for them to consider.
Yeah. Regarding this point was also raised several times as barriers, is the whole question of prices for consumers. My conclusion, as my personal view, is that we cannot avoid that prices will be increasing, because that's exactly the reason why there's so much consumption, or one of the reasons is that it's very cheap, this fast fashion. So do you think that any politician will take the risk because you will have a consumer, people will not be happy about that because they can consume less, and that doesn't make you politically very popular in these times.
If you want me to try to answer that, I think
please.
I think this is, of course, this is really difficult. I think the attempt from the EU side, I was also very heavily involved in the EU strategy on textiles, was to do everything that could be done without changing the prices. So the aim is actually for a lot of these instruments, is to do what prices would do. So the hope is eco-design, EPR is to replace the change of prices. But I think even since then, we are seeing that plastics is becoming really, really cheap, and it is the major issue. And I don't know whether politicians will ever want to go there or not. And as long as synthetic fibers made of plastics is so cheap, there's a huge incentive to put more and more on the market. That's really clear, and it's the role of the experts, I think, to say if you would change this would have this and this effects, and then we have to see how far our policymakers are willing to go.
Yeah, good. Well, there is this comment. I saw it. It's about the environmental tax on fast fashion. And there's a really good remark about how do you exactly define fast fashion. Many luxury brands also product in fast fashion conditions, so large production volumes. So how do you exactly distinguish between, let's say, slow fashion and fast fashion?
Are you asking me again?
Well, or
anybody else
who wants to respond to this and who put this remark here.
Maybe I can just start. There is, of course, a mentioning of fast fashion versus slow fashion in the EU strategy on textiles. It's not really defined, and I'm not a very clear definition. So this is not very clearly defined. So it is up to interpretation. There we really have to rely on the experts and on the scientists who've researched into this for decades. But of course, it is it is a question of, how fast is fast? Does it have to be 5 times a year to be fast, or is it fast if it's just once or twice a year?
Well, of course, there's this, I'm not exactly clear, in France, you have this, this punishment on fast fashion. I'm not sure if it's implemented, but it was agreed by the parliament, but not yet, agreed at higher level, I think. Maybe Mario, you're working in France, you know very much about the French situation. Maybe you can explain a bit more about how this is exactly defined in France.
So it is not implemented yet. It has been discussed, but it's not implemented so far.
And can you elaborate a bit more about how it is defined, or is that exactly the reason that
there is not, at least I haven't seen any public information so far about that one, how it would be then implemented. So it would be just guessing now to think about what they would do. But indeed, there has been very active discussions on that topic.
Does somebody else want to say something about this? Has an idea or how to distinguish exactly between the fast and slow fashion?
Yeah, sorry, that was my comment. And I think it's just very interesting in the context of France, and I think seeing where the regulation came from, and obviously in France, I think you do have a lot of the kind of luxury group and luxury fashion, the luxury brands. So it's interesting because I think this legislation's really been positioned and kind of targeting the Sheins and the Zara and the Interdex, which is good because, like you say, they are the cheapest garments and they're the ones that kind of driving mass consumption. But I think if we're really concerned with environmental impacts and resource use, we can't ignore other brands that maybe have a higher price point and are still producing large volumes with large impacts. So it's how do you define fast fashion so it doesn't only target the kind of lower end garments. And yeah, from my research institute, which is Hot or Cool in Berlin, we've done a lot of research on consumption inequalities and have an evidence base that shows that it is higher income individuals who are the ones that are consuming large volumes of fashion. And therefore, it's not clear to me necessarily how targeting the lowest garments will shift their behavior. So I think it's just important to pay attention to those dynamics.
Yeah, thank you.
So Miriam, I think I will need to jump in because now we are run out of time, but I really appreciate all the comments, suggestions provided. It has been a very fruitful discussion with all participants. But the Miro board will be open for another week. So if you feel like you still have a word to put, or if you want to share it with your colleagues, please feel free to do so that we will still incorporate your comments and suggestions to the board. You see the link on the chat again. And I also want to invite you to our upcoming workshops for the plastics and the construction next week, Thursday and Friday. There will be a conclusion conference of these workshops, but on the 21st of March, also I would like to mention about that. And you will also receive, we will also do a survey in order to prioritize these policy options that we will refine, revise after these meetings. So if you want to be engaged in our activities, please subscribe as a stakeholder or keep in touch with us. We would very much are into collecting your suggestions and improving our analysis. So this is all from our side. Thank you very much again and hope to be engaged again in another activity that we are organizing. Have a nice day ahead.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much.